The most destructive force in the history of the elves was not a dragon, nor was it a dark lord. It was a promise, an oath sworn in anger that became a sentient curse, a poison in the bloodline of 7 brothers, dooming them to become the very monsters they had sworn to destroy. This tragedy is so absolute it makes the great Greek myths of cursed families seem like petty squabbles, for these heroes were fated by their own words to turn their swords against their only allies and slaughter the last hope of their people in a desperate mad hunt for a single jewel. This is the dark chronicle of the sons of Fëanor, and the ruin they brought upon the world long after their father was slain. It is a story of how an unbreakable oath forced them to commit 2 more horrific kinslayings, acts so foul they stained the very soul of their race. This is the tale of how a family of heroes became butchers, forever defined not by their war against the great enemy, but by the war they waged against their own kin. Fëanor, the greatest of all elves, was dead, slain by Gothmog, lord of Balrogs. His fiery spirit had burned his body to ash upon his passing. Yet his legacy did not die with him. It lived on in his 7 sons, and more potently, in the terrible oath they had sworn. Upon the fields of Mithrim, with their father's body gone to dust, Maedhros, Maglor, Celegorm, Caranthir, Curufin, Amrod and Amras repeated the vow. They called upon the eternal darkness to take them if they failed. They swore to pursue any being, from Valar to demon to the unborn, who would dare take or keep a Silmaril from them. There would be no mercy, no turning back. Their oath was absolute, an engine of vengeance that, once started, could not be stopped. For decades, this oath drove their war against the true enemy, Morgoth Bauglir, the Dark Lord of Angband, who held all 3 of their father's jewels. They established realms in the east of Beleriand, forming a long wall of steel and vigilance against the forces of darkness. They were the shield of the free peoples, their hatred for Morgoth, a burning, righteous fire. Maedhros, the eldest and wisest of the brothers, held their fractured family and their disparate armies together through sheer force of will, his spirit as unbreakable as the steel that replaced his lost hand. But the oath was always there, whispering in the quiet moments, a hunger that was never satisfied. And then, word came. A single Silmaril was free, not recovered by elves, but stolen from the very crown of Morgoth by a mortal man, Beren, and an elven maid, Luthien. That jewel, a star of living light, did not come to the sons of Fëanor. It was taken south, to the secret forest kingdom of Doriath, and set in a necklace for King Thingol, Luthien's father. The sons of Fëanor heard the news. Their jewel, the purpose of their existence, now rested in the treasury of another elven king. The oath stirred. It demanded action. But the war against Morgoth was paramount, and Maedhros counseled patience. To attack Doriath, a kingdom of their own kin, was unthinkable. It would be a betrayal of their entire cause. But how long could 7 warriors, bound by an unbreakable, supernatural vow, ignore the call of the jewel that defined their very existence? The answer came in fire and ruin. The great battle of unnumbered tears, the Nirnaeth Arnudiad, was a catastrophe. The grand alliance of elves, men, and dwarves that Maedhros had assembled was shattered by treason and the overwhelming might of Angband. The dragon Glaurung broke their lines, and the Balrogs reaped a terrible harvest. Hope in Beleriand was extinguished, leaving only ash and despair. The Fëanorians were decimated, their lands overrun, their power broken. In the darkness of their defeat, grief turned to bitter resentment, and all the while the oath festered. It told them their defeat was a consequence of their failure. They had allowed another to keep the Silmaril, and the powers they had sworn by had punished them for it. Their focus shifted from the lost war against the enemy to the single, shining jewel they could perhaps reclaim. Then, fate delivered them their reason. News came from Doriath of more bloodshed. King Thingol, consumed by his own greed for the Silmaril, had been murdered in his own treasury by the dwarven smiths he had hired to set it in the Noglamir. A brief, bloody war between elf and dwarf erupted, and Doriath was sacked. But Beren and an army of green elves ambushed the dwarves on their way home, slew their king, and reclaimed the necklace. The Silmaril was passed to Dior, Thingol's grandson, who now sought to restore the glory of Doriath. He wore the jewel openly, and the beauty of that Silmaril was so great that the kingdom began to heal, to find new light in the darkness that surrounded it. But that light reached the east. It reached the 7 brothers. To them, the news was a sign. The Silmaril was now held by the son of the man who had first stolen it from their grasp. Their patience was gone, replaced by the gnawing agony of their unfulfilled vow. Maedhros, ever the diplomat, sent word to Dior. He spoke of their claim, of their oath, and demanded the return of their father's creation. Dior sent no reply. His silence was an answer. He was the son of Luthien, whose claim to the jewel seemed to him more just. He was a king, and he would not be commanded. That pride would be his undoing. For the sons of Fëanor, this silence was the final insult. The choice was made for them, for the oath they had sworn was not a mere promise. It was a living entity, a shadow that consumed reason, and left only a burning, insatiable hunger. In the heart of winter, they fell upon Doriath. There was no warning, no parley. They stormed the 1,000 caves of Menegroth, and brought open war to the hidden kingdom. Thus began the second kinslaying, the second time in history that elf would slaughter elf. It was a nightmare of kin strife. The elves of Doriath, though brave, were caught by surprise and overwhelmed. Dior met Celegorm in the heart of the battle, and slew him, but he was in turn cut down by the others. Nimloth, his wife, was murdered. The halls that had once echoed with song now rang with the screams of the dying and the clash of elven steel on elven shield. The Fëanorians were merciless, for the oath demanded nothing less. The cost was immense. 3 of the sons of Fëanor paid for their prize with their own lives. Celegorm fell, Curufin fell, Caranthir fell, but they were victorious. They had conquered the greatest elven kingdom in Beleriand. Bruised, bleeding, and with 3 of their brothers dead, Maedhros and the survivors scoured the 1,000 caves, their hands drenched in the blood of their kin. They searched the bodies. They tore apart the treasury. The Silmaril was gone. What could be worse than carving a path through the bodies of your own kin to reclaim what is yours? What could be more soul-crushing than staining your hands with the blood of elf lords and ladies in the name of a sacred vow? The answer was this: to do all of that and to find nothing. The jewel wasn't there. The justification for their atrocity, the singular purpose that had driven them to this new low, had vanished. The Fëanorians had sacked Doriath, but they had not been thorough enough. In the chaos of the assault, a remnant of Dior's people had escaped. They fled south, down the great river Sirion, and with them went Dior's young daughter Elwing, and on her breast, a glittering star in the darkness, was the Silmaril. The prize had slipped through their bloody fingers once again. The cruelty of the oath was not yet finished. In a fit of vengeful madness, servants of the fallen Celegorm seized Dior's twin sons. They were cast into the winter forest, left to die of hunger and cold. When news of this reached Maedhros, a flicker of his old nobility sparked. He was horrified, and launched a long and desperate search for the children. But it was in vain. They were never seen again. Another stain upon the souls of Fëanor's house. For Maedhros, the weight was becoming unbearable. 3 brothers dead. The name of their house reviled across the continent. And the last act of their victory had been the murder of children. He was the lord of a broken people, ruling over nothing but ash and bitter memory. But as the shadow of the Fëanorians deepened, a new light was kindled in the south. The refugees from Doriath, with Elwing and the Silmaril, joined with the last remnants of the fallen kingdom of Gondolin. At the mouths of the Silurion, they built a new home, a final sanctuary for the elves of Beleriand. It was a place of sea longing and sorrow, but also of hope. And in that sanctuary, Elwing the Fair grew to womanhood. She became the lady of her people, and married the great mariner, Arundel, the son of Tuor, and Idril, the hero of Gondolin's fall. The bloodlines of the greatest heroes of elves and men were joined, and in their union, 2 sons were born, Elrond and Elros. The Silmaril became their people's most sacred treasure, a ward against despair. Arundel himself wore it upon his brow when he sailed his ship, Vingelot, into the dark, uncharted seas, searching for a path to the undying lands, to beg for the aid of the Valar. For a time, there was peace, a dreadful, waiting peace. The remaining sons of Fëanor, Maedhros, Maglor, Amrod, and Amras, dwelt in the east, licking their wounds, their power a shadow of what it once was. They knew of the havens. They knew the Silmaril was there, but the thought of a third kinslaying was a horror they could not yet face. The blood of Doriath was still too fresh a memory. Maglor, the second son, the mightiest singer of all time, was the most tormented. His heart was sick with grief. The oath burned in his mind, but the song of his soul was one of regret. How could he sing of beauty when his hands had wrought such ugliness? He counseled Maedhros to wait, to forbear. Perhaps fate would deliver the jewel without more strife. But the oath does not know patience. It does not understand peace. It only knows hunger. As years passed, the pressure of their unfulfilled vow mounted. The torment became a physical agony. Word was sent from Maedhros to the havens of Sirion. At first, it was couched in friendship and sorrow for the dark deeds of the past. But the message was clear: "Surrender the Silmaril. It is ours by right." The people of Sirion refused, and Elwing refused. The Silmaril was not just Fëanor's creation to them. It was a hallowed thing, sanctified by the quest of Beren and Luthien. It was the light of Arundel, their lord, now sailing on his desperate quest. It was the hope of their entire race. To surrender it to the Kinslayers who had destroyed their homes seemed an obscene betrayal. They sent back no reply. That silence was the only answer needed. For the second time, their claim was denied. The oath, which had slumbered fitfully, now awoke in a storm of fire and rage. It twisted their grief into fury, their regret into resolve. There was no more debate. There was no more choice. The remaining 4 sons of Fëanor gathered what strength they had left and marched south. They would unmake the last haven of their people to claim their prize. The third and final kinslaying was the cruelest of them all. They fell upon the havens without warning, a surprise attack born of desperation. This was not a battle between organized armies, but a massacre in a city of refugees. Elf fought elf amidst the homes of the innocent, and the waters of the bay ran red with the blood of the Eldar. The defenders, led by Elwing, fought with the courage of despair, but they were outnumbered and overwhelmed. The cost was, as always, catastrophic. In the bitter fighting, the last of the Fëanorian twins, Amrod and Amras, were slain. Now only 2 sons of Fëanor remained of the original 7. Maedhros and Maglor fought on, their hearts numb, driven only by the inexorable will of their vow. They broke through the final defenses and stormed the central tower where Elwing had made her last stand. They found her there, cornered, her people slaughtered around her, her husband at sea, her home in flames. They saw her young sons, Elrond and Elros, captured by their soldiers. Maedhros and Maglor advanced, their swords bare, their eyes fixed on the jewel that blazed on her breast. But Elwing would not be taken. She would not allow the Silmaril to fall into the hands that had brought such ruin upon her family. With a cry of despair, she clasped the Silmaril to her heart and cast herself from the precipice into the raging sea. It was over. A final, ultimate failure. But then, a miracle. The Vala Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, whose power runs in all the seas and rivers of the world, would not allow the light of the Silmaril to be extinguished. He lifted Elwing from the waves, not as an elf maiden, but transforming her into a great white bird. Upon her breast the Silmaril was set like a star, and with a power she had never known, she flew up into the night sky, a streak of living light against the darkness, seeking her husband Irandil across the vast and lonely ocean. Maedhros and Maglor stood alone, victorious and utterly broken. They had conquered the last elven city. They had slain their kin. They had lost their last 2 brothers. And the Silmaril, the cause of it all, was gone, flown into the sky beyond any hope of recovery. Their victory was the most profound defeat imaginable. The battle was over, and in the ruins of the havens, the 2 remaining sons of Fëanor found the spoils of their war. Not a jewel, not a crown, but 2 terrified, orphaned children, Elwing's sons, Elrond and Elros. The oath had demanded everything from them, and in the end, it had given them nothing but the children of the very people they had just destroyed. Maglor, the singer whose heart could still feel, took pity on them. He cradled the boys, his heart breaking. And against all reason, against the very darkness that had consumed his family, he resolved to protect them. And so, in the sky above the drowning world, a new hope was kindled. Elwing, in her elven form once more, was reunited with her beloved. With the power of the Silmaril on his brow, Irandil steered his hallowed ship, Vingelot, past the shadows and enchantments guarding the shores of the Undying Lands. At last a mortal man, bearing the hope of the 2 kindreds, set foot upon the forbidden coast of Valinor. He went alone, forbidding Elwing and his crew to risk the ban of the Valar, and made his plea. He begged for pardon for the Noldor, and pity for the suffering of elves and men, enslaved under the tyranny of Morgoth. And the Valar were moved. They listened. The plea was granted. But Irandil, having set foot on the immortal shores, could never again return to the lands of men. A choice was given to him and Elwing, as it would be to their sons, to be counted among elves or men. They chose the fate of the firstborn. The Valar hallowed Vingelot, and set it to sail the heavens. And Arundel the mariner, with the Silmaril upon his brow, became a star of hope for the world, a light in the darkness, a promise of the dawn. That star, the light of their Silmaril, signaled the coming of the final war, the War of Wrath. The host of the Valar came upon Middle-earth like a storm. The conflict that followed shattered the very foundations of the world. Mountains were leveled, and the sea roared into new lands. The final battle against Morgoth was waged in the sky itself, as he unleashed his ultimate weapon, the winged dragons. But Arundel came, shining with a light that drove the dragons back. After a day and a night of terrible battle, he slew Ancalagon the Black, the mightiest of the dragon host, who fell from the sky and broke the towers of Thangorodrim in his ruin. The war was won, Morgoth was utterly defeated, and the 2 remaining Silmarils were recovered from his crown. But the Oath of Fëanor was not yet finished. Maedhros and Maglor, the last 2 sons, gaunt and terrible in their unending torment, came forth and demanded the jewels. But their deeds had made them unworthy. The jewels, which they had sacrificed everything to reclaim, rejected them. The sacred light seared their flesh, a final testament to their fall. The torment was unbearable. Maedhros, in his despair and agony, cast himself and the Silmaril he held into a fiery chasm that opened in the earth. And Maglor, the last son, whose song was once the joy of the elves, could not endure his pain. He cast his Silmaril into the sea, and he was never seen again among his people, but wanders the shores of the world, singing his regret to the waves. So it was that the 3 Silmarils found their long homes, one in the heavens, one in the heart of the earth, and one in the deep waters. The first age of the sun had come to its cataclysmic end. The great tales were over, but in the quiet that followed, new seeds were sown. Elrond, son of Arundel, chose the life of the elves, becoming a master of lore and a haven for the weary in the ages to come. His brother Elros chose the gift of men, becoming the first king of the great island realm of Numenor, granted a lifespan many times that of his kin. From ruin came renewal, from darkness a star. The light of the Silmarils was gone from the world, but not from memory, and not from the sky, and its tale would echo down through all the long years of the world. The chronicles of the First Age are written, but the legend is never truly over. Its shadow and its light stretch into the great ages that follow, shaping the triumphs and the tragedies of Numenor, and the final war for the Ring of Power. To witness the dawn of the Second Age and the forging of the rings, to follow the path of the heroes and villains who will define the future of Middle-earth, you cannot miss what comes next. Subscribe to the _Silmarillion_Chronicles and join us as we journey into the shadow that falls after the dawn.